What's up, everybody? My name is Joe Brown, and this is Heresy Financial. If you don't already know who Lyn Alden is, you are in for a treat. I read everything she writes, I reference her work all the time, and I've even interviewed her on this channel before. Now, she recently wrote an article on whether QE causes inequality or not. And it was so good, I thought I would share a few of my favorite points with you today. And spoiler, for those of you who do not want to stick around until the end, the answer is, it depends. Come on, you really didn't think I was gonna let you off that easy, did you? Ready? Let's dive in. Okay, so if you know Lyn Alden's work, you know that nuanced is probably the best way to describe it, and this recent article on QE is no exception. Like I said, it was fantastic, so much so I sent it out of my weekly newsletter, and if you're not already getting that, it is a weekly email that I send out that includes 4 or 5 of the best articles that I've read that week. If you're not already signed up, the link is in the description below. Okay, so does QE cause inequality? Well, it depends. So the first question we have to ask is, what is QE? QE obviously stands for quantitative easing, which is a fancy way of saying expanding the money supply. Supply refers to the quantity, that's quantitative part of it. Easing refers to the expansion, and so it's expanding the money supply. Quantitative easing. And really, it's just a euphemism for debt monetization, turning government debt into money. You see, when the Federal Reserve was first started, there was a big fear from the American people that the central bank would just turn into a source of unlimited funding for the federal government. And that could be very easy to do if the central bank has the ability to buy government debt, or in other words, loan money to the government. Because instead of the government having to borrow from real people with real money, they could just borrow from the central bank, who has a monopoly on the creation of new money. So they came up with a rule aimed at preventing the central bank from becoming that source of unlimited funding for the government, and that was preventing the Federal Reserve from being allowed legally to lend directly to the government. Well, fast forward to today, and we can see that we get the exact same results. They just use banks as the middleman. So government borrows from banks, who turn around and sell that debt to the Federal Reserve, and in exchange for that new cash, the banks reloan more money to the government, and essentially you have debt monetization taking place. Even though the Fed is just buying that debt off the open market, that cash is turning around and being lent to the government. So you have debt monetization anyway. So that's what QE is, but why does that matter? Well, it really means that the central bank is the spigot for the hose. It's not the nozzle. It's the source of where the water comes from, but it's not deciding where that water gets sprayed. That's up to fiscal policy, not monetary policy. In other words, Congress decides where that money is spent. The Fed just writes the checks. So it's not QE itself that causes the inequality, it's what Congress decides to do with that money. And unsurprisingly, this is backed up by evidence. All we have to do is compare the United States to the 3 other countries who have larger amounts of QE by a percentage of GDP that the United States does, and look at their inequality. And it turns out the countries that have done far greater amounts of quantitative easing than the United States have better inequality, not worse. So again, it's not in writing the blank check, it's where that money is spent. Now, I highly recommend reading the article because she goes very clearly into detail on exactly what's different about how the United States spends its money versus some of these other countries. But the 2 biggest ones that stand out are, number 1, military spending, which very clearly, the United States spends way more on the military, both in absolute terms and as a percent, than any other country, and healthcare, which we spend a lot more on healthcare in the United States for no better results. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking, well, that's perfect, because all we have to do then is get the right people in charge to spend the money the right way, and we'll fix the problems. And here are a few of my thoughts on that. Number 1, it's still the most effective to go to the root issue. If your pipes have sprung a leak, it's better to go shut the water off to the house rather than trying to first plug the hole. Second, we have to realize how scale changes things. With complex systems, sometimes as they scale, they change so much that they turn into fundamentally different things. Here's a great example of this. Airplane hangars are large buildings that are designed to keep airplanes out of the elements, to protect them from harsh weather. But as is often the case, as you scale things up, unintended consequences step in. And that's exactly what happened to the Goodyear air dock. This hangar is so large that there are massive temperature differences between the different walls that are in the sun versus the shade, or how high that part of the wall is off the ground, and differences in temperature of the air inside versus outside, that it actually creates its own weather. That's right, the temperature differences cause condensation of the water in the air up at the top of the hangar that then collects and drips down and causes rain on the inside, which the whole purpose of that building was to protect aircraft from the elements, and it's so big that it's reversed and it creates its own weather. And so that's how scale can change things. So you might be thinking, why am I talking about scale? What does this have to do with anything? Because you can't compare something small versus something large and say as long as they do the same things, they'll have the same results. Not true. You can't compare America as a country versus other countries that are the size of some cities in America. America is the third largest country by landmass, the third largest country by population in the world, the #1 largest country by the size of the economy. Heck, even one state, just take California. If California was its own separate country, it would be the 5th largest economy in the world. So when you talk about scale, this is what I'm talking about. To paraphrase Nassim Taleb, one can simultaneously be a communist at home, Democrat at the city level, Republican at the state level, and a libertarian at the national level, because scale changes things. And when you have a command and control economy where a few people can make a decision to transfer purchasing power away from 330 million people and transfer that through spending to a few, you will absolutely wind up with problems of inequality. So in summary, it's time to shut off the spigot, shut off the money printer, and end the Fed. Not because the Federal Reserve is choosing to spend that newly printed money on things that are causing inequality, but because they are directly funding the ones who do. As always, really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.